Love is the first and most essential bond, but it's also the invisible thread, woven with time, attention, and tenderness through consistent nurturing relationships.
The gathering had survived uncomfortable silences, guarded smiles, and years of unresolved tension. But nobody expected Princess Charlotte to become the line that could not be crossed. One sentence from Meghan changed the atmosphere instantly. Catherine stopped speaking. William stared across the room. And before anyone could soften what had just been said, the Princess of Wales rose from her chair and walked out, leaving the royal family frozen behind her. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine had entered the private family gathering determined to remain calm. William knew how much that restraint cost her, especially after months of strain between the two sides of the family. Charles had supported the meeting because he wanted fewer private wounds becoming public battles, while Harry arrived hoping the evening might finally reduce some of the bitterness that had hardened around everyone. For Catherine, however, the most important subject was never status or reputation. It was her children. The conversation turned toward George, Charlotte, and Louis, the younger generation whose lives carried enormous public attention simply because of their place in the royal family. Meghan began questioning how early children should be shaped by royal expectations. At first, Catherine listened. Then Meghan said Charlotte was already becoming the palace's perfect little princess, and might one day discover that her public image mattered more to the institution than the child underneath it. Catherine did not move. She looked directly at Meghan and asked, quietly, whether she truly meant to bring Charlotte into disagreements between adults. Meghan held her position, arguing that she was criticizing the pressure surrounding royal children, not attacking the girl herself. But Catherine heard something far more personal. She heard a judgment about her daughter, her parenting, and the private world she had fought to protect. William watched his wife push back her chair. Catherine told the room that criticism of her was one thing, but speculation about Charlotte was another. The prince started to rise, yet she signaled that she wanted to leave alone. Then she walked out. Charles felt the weight of the silence immediately. The king knew this reaction carried history because Charlotte had already become the subject of another painful private exchange months earlier. Harry sensed it too, though he did not yet know everything. William stayed where he was. He turned toward Meghan, his anger controlled but unmistakable, and asked only, "Why Charlotte?" Meghan hesitated for several seconds. That hesitation changed everything. Catherine may have left the room, but the reason her composure finally broke began long before Meghan spoke those devastating words. To understand why Catherine walked away, instead of fighting back, everyone around that table had to understand what Charlotte represented to her. This was not simply another clash between two royal women carrying years of tension. Catherine believed a boundary protecting her child had been crossed. Meghan believed she had exposed something uncomfortable about royal life. Between them stood William and Harry, two brothers already carrying more history than either could safely ignore. Catherine had spent years trying to give Charlotte something close to an ordinary childhood, inside an extraordinary family. The Princess of Wales, a title given to the wife of the heir to the throne, knew her daughter would grow up under constant comparison, ceremony, public judgment, and expectations she never chose. That pressure mattered, because Catherine feared Charlotte could one day feel watched before she ever felt free. Meghan saw the same pressure differently. She believed royal roles could slowly swallow the private person underneath them, and Charlotte's growing public presence seemed to confirm that fear. Meghan did not think she had attacked a child. She thought she had challenged a system. Catherine heard something else entirely, an accusation that she was allowing the monarchy to shape her daughter into a symbol. That difference turned the argument deeply personal. William felt the remark struck at both his wife and the way they were raising their children. Harry understood Meghan's wider concern, but he also knew that saying Charlotte's name had transformed an argument about institutions into a wound inside the family. Catherine reached the adjoining room and stopped. She placed both hands against the edge of a table and breathed slowly, forcing herself not to cry, not to shout, not to return in anger. William entered moments later. He did not ask what happened, because he had heard enough. Catherine looked at him and said only, "She brought Charlotte into it." William's face changed because this was not new. Months earlier, Catherine had told him that Charlotte had become part of another uncomfortable private conversation with Meghan. At the time, she had asked him not to confront anyone. She wanted the matter buried before it became another family crisis. The prince had believed it was finished. Harry, meanwhile, stayed behind with Meghan. He studied her silence and asked whether something had happened before that night. Meghan hesitated. That pause told him more than an explanation could. The insult had not appeared from nowhere. It had reopened a wound created months earlier during one private family moment Catherine had deliberately kept hidden. Once that buried exchange surfaced, her walkout would no longer look sudden at all, and William was about to remember everything. Months before Catherine pushed back her chair and left that gathering, another conversation had ended with the same name hanging painfully in the air. There were no cameras, no public statements, and no dramatic confrontation afterward. Catherine deliberately kept it quiet. Meghan believed the subject had been misunderstood. Yet what happened during that earlier family weekend became the hidden trigger for everything that followed, and the reason one sentence could detonate so much buried emotion. Catherine stayed behind after a private family weekend at Windsor, the royal residence used for both official duties and intimate family gatherings. Meghan remained too, and for a few minutes their conversation seemed almost harmless. They spoke about George, Charlotte, and Louis, and about how quickly public attention could turn childhood into performance. That mattered because both women understood the pressure surrounding royal children, but they understood the danger in very different ways. Meghan began with concern, not accusation. She said Charlotte seemed unusually aware of cameras, greetings, and protocol for someone so young. Protocol simply meant the formal rules governing royal behavior, from how members appear publicly to how they interact at official events. Catherine listened, but her expression hardened as the conversation became more personal. Then Meghan asked the question that Catherine would never forget. Had she ever worried that Charlotte was learning to perform being royal before she has learned who she wants to be? Catherine felt the words cut deeper than Meghan seemed to realize. She told her that Charlotte was not an example, not a symbol, and not a child to be analyzed in arguments about the monarchy. Meghan answered that avoiding difficult questions did not make those questions disappear. Catherine did not raise her voice. She simply told her that whatever disagreements existed between adults, Charlotte's private emotional life was not open for discussion. The silence that followed carried more weight than shouting could have. Catherine opened the door and said they should end the conversation there. Meghan left believing her concern had been twisted into an insult. Catherine left believing she had just been forced to defend her daughter against speculation from within the family itself. William heard only part of the story later that night. Catherine told him enough to make clear that Charlotte had become the center of an uncomfortable exchange, but she asked him not to confront anyone. The prince agreed reluctantly because she wanted the matter buried, not weaponized. Harry heard another version from Meghan. She told him privately that she had been questioning the system around Charlotte, not attacking the girl. He warned her not to return to the subject because Catherine had clearly experienced it differently. That warning should have ended everything. Instead, months later, Meghan reached for the same argument again. This time Catherine would not absorb it quietly, and the restraint that had once protected the family disappeared with it. The door had barely closed behind Catherine when William turned back toward the room. The future king was no longer interested in philosophical arguments about royal life. His daughter had been named, his wife had walked out, and the atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable to deeply personal. Harry moved instinctively closer to Meghan. Charles remained seated. Then William asked the question nobody could avoid: why had Charlotte needed to become part of this at all? William refused to let anyone smooth over what had happened. When one voice tried to redirect the conversation, the prince stopped it immediately. He said Catherine's departure could not be treated like a moment of oversensitivity that would disappear by morning. The issue mattered because Charlotte was not an abstract example. She was their daughter, a child already carrying the weight of public expectations she had never chosen. Meghan answered without backing away. She insisted that her point concerned the pressure placed on royal children, not Charlotte as a person. She argued that the family often reacted to criticism of the monarchy as though every question about the institution were a personal attack. William rejected that distinction. He told her she could have discussed parenting, public pressure, or succession, the formal order determining who can inherit the crown, without assigning an emotional future to his daughter. Harry rose as the tension sharpened. William stepped forward, and suddenly the brothers were facing one another across only a few feet. Harry said Meghan had not insulted Charlotte. The prince answered that intention did not erase impact, and it certainly did not erase the words themselves. Harry looked toward his wife because he understood what William was saying, even while wanting to defend her. Meghan held her ground, but her tone changed. She acknowledged that naming Charlotte had caused pain. Yet she would not abandon her belief that children inside the monarchy could be shaped too early by public roles. William replied that Catherine had already made one boundary clear months earlier, and that was when Charles finally spoke. Charles stunned both brothers by admitting he knew about the earlier Windsor conversation. The king explained that Catherine had told him privately enough for him to understand that Charlotte had already become a deeply sensitive subject. She had not asked him to intervene, punish anyone, or escalate the matter. She had simply made clear that her daughter was not to become part of adult disputes. Harry looked back at Meghan. This was no longer about a misunderstanding nobody had explained. Catherine had objected before. Meghan had known the subject caused pain. The room fell silent again. Everyone turned toward Charles because the argument had now become a question of authority as much as emotion. And when the king finally spoke, he did not decide who had won. He decided exactly where the line around Charlotte would be drawn. Charles had spent most of the confrontation listening, but silence from the monarch could not last forever. Catherine was gone. William was furious. Harry was defensive. Meghan was unwilling to abandon the principle behind her words. The king now faced an intensely personal problem disguised as a royal one. How could a fractured family debate its own institution without turning the youngest members into ammunition? His answer changed the balance in the room immediately. Charles spoke slowly because he understood the danger of making the moment sound like a decree. He told them that every adult in the family had the right to question royal traditions, public expectations, and decisions made by senior figures. But he drew a line between criticizing a system and interpreting the private emotional life of a child. William listened closely. For the prince, that distinction mattered because Charlotte was not part of an ideological debate. She was his daughter. Charles removed his glasses and set them down. The pause exposed how personally he felt the argument. He remembered what it meant to grow up while adults, institutions, and the public explained who a royal child was supposed to become. The king had watched that same pressure follow William and Harry. He knew discussion could turn into definition, and definition could become a burden before a child understood what was happening. Harry challenged him. He asked whether uncomfortable observations were now forbidden simply because they involved royal children. Charles answered that observation was not the problem. Making a child carry the weight of an argument between adults was. Harry fell quiet, but the tension remained because he still believed Meghan's wider concern about royal pressure deserved to be heard. Meghan felt the judgment narrowing around her. She asked why similar commentary from journalists, courtiers, and commentators rarely produced this outrage. William answered before Charles could. Those people, he said, had not sat face-to-face with Catherine and been asked not to cross this boundary. Meghan heard the difference, even if she did not accept it. William then made one fact clear. Catherine had never asked for punishment. She had not demanded that Meghan be excluded, publicly corrected, or forced into an apology. She had asked for only one thing. Charlotte was to remain outside adult disputes. Charles made the decision. The family discussion would end for the evening, and there would be no further conversation involving the children unless Catherine chose to reopen it herself. Meghan accepted the ending. Harry left frustrated. William went to find his wife. The argument was over for the night, but the consequences had only begun, and Catherine's next decision would determine whether the rupture hardened or healed. Mourning did not soften what had happened. There was no convenient royal mechanism capable of making the previous night disappear. Catherine remembered the sentence exactly. Meghan remembered the silence after it. William remained angry that an old boundary had been crossed again, while Harry found himself trapped between defending his wife's intent and recognizing the pain her words had caused. For the first time, everyone had to confront the new reality without the adrenaline of the confrontation. Catherine refused to pretend that breakfast could restore normality. The informal family meal that had been expected to bring everyone together quietly fractured into separate conversations, separate rooms, and carefully avoided encounters. Charles wanted no dramatic announcement because he knew an official response would only push Charlotte's name deeper into the dispute. The king instructed those around him to treat the matter as a family conflict, not a royal crisis. That distinction mattered because once palace machinery became involved, private pain could quickly become public spectacle. Catherine sat beside William and told him she did not regret walking out. She admitted that staying would have left her only two choices: lose control or remain silent while her daughter was discussed in a way she found unacceptable. William wanted something stronger. The prince considered demanding a direct apology before any future family contact. Catherine stopped him. She would not protect Charlotte by creating another battle that forced everyone to keep repeating the child's name. Harry confronted Meghan with a harder question. He asked why she had returned to a subject Catherine had already identified as painful. Meghan answered that she still believed the wider concern about royal children was legitimate, but her certainty had weakened. Harry reminded her that a valid concern could still be expressed in the wrong way. She finally began separating what she intended from what Catherine actually experienced. Meghan understood the difference slowly. She had thought she was criticizing royal culture, but Catherine had heard someone analyzing her daughter's emotional future. That realization did not erase Meghan's beliefs. It changed where she believed the argument should have been aimed. Catherine chose restraint once again. Rather than send an angry demand, she wrote Harry a brief private message saying she needed distance and that the children must never become part of adult disagreements again. Harry read the message twice. He understood that it was not an invitation to debate. Harry then did something neither side expected. He contacted William and asked to speak alone, without Meghan, Catherine, advisors, or palace staff present. For once, the next move would not belong to Charles or the institution. It would belong to two brothers sitting alone, forced to decide whether protecting their families required another fight, or finally ending one. There were no advisors in the room, no wives to defend, and no institution to blame. William and Harry sat opposite each other, carrying years of resentment, loyalty, frustration, and shared memory. Yet neither brother began by discussing Meghan or Catherine. Harry began with Charlotte. That choice changed the conversation immediately, because beneath everything else they had become, they were still two men who knew what it meant to grow up while strangers debated their lives. Harry spoke first and admitted that Charlotte's name should never have become the center of the argument. He told William that he still understood Meghan's concern about the pressure placed on royal children, but he now saw why Catherine believed a personal boundary had been crossed. That mattered because the dispute was no longer about who had the better argument. It was about whether adults had the right to use a child's personality, upbringing, or future as evidence for their own grievances. William did not ask Harry to reject his wife. He said that was never the point. The prince only wanted one thing acknowledged. Parents had to be allowed to protect their children from becoming symbols in conflicts they did not create. He explained that Catherine could tolerate criticism of herself, of royal tradition, even of the decisions they made as senior members of the family. What she could not accept was Charlotte becoming an idea for adults to debate. Harry lowered his voice and admitted what had troubled him most. The moment Catherine walked out, he knew the argument had gone too far. One sentence had become larger than Meghan's intention almost instantly. He remembered what it felt like as a boy when strangers assigned motives to him, predicted his future, and treated his emotions as public property. Suddenly, Catherine's reaction no longer seemed defensive. It seemed painfully familiar. William heard that and softened, but only slightly. He explained that Catherine's deepest fear was Charlotte one day, reading that members of her own family had discussed who she was becoming before she had any chance to define herself. The future king did not want another public feud. He wanted the subject closed. Harry then offered something different. He would speak to Meghan, not with a demand for a scripted apology, but with the understanding he had reached himself. He would explain why Catherine heard the remark as something invasive rather than theoretical. William agreed. He did not pretend years of tension had disappeared. He did not offer instant forgiveness, but he accepted that this particular battle should end by protecting Charlotte, not by dragging her name through another round of conflict. Harry left knowing the next decision was no longer his. The brothers had finally found common ground, but reconciliation still depended on the one person whose words had started the crisis. Private royal disputes rarely remain private once absence becomes visible. Within a day, Catherine's abrupt departure from the gathering begins dominating conversation far beyond the family itself. But what captures public attention is not shouting, accusation, or ceremony. It is the simplicity of the moment. A mother quietly removing herself after hearing her daughter discussed. Suddenly the dispute becomes a national conversation about children, boundaries, family loyalty, and how much royal life should ever demand from the youngest generation. Catherine watched the story spread with growing discomfort. Meghan's remark about Charlotte now sat at the center of public debate, and the Princess of Wales understood the bitter irony immediately. She had walked away to stop her daughter becoming part of an adult argument, yet Charlotte's name was now being repeated everywhere. William shared that frustration, because the attention threatened to create exactly what both parents had tried to prevent: a child becoming the symbol of a conflict she had never chosen. Public opinion divided almost at once. Some people defended Meghan's broader criticism, arguing that royal children grow up under pressures few outsiders can fully understand. Others believed naming Charlotte had changed the nature of the argument completely. Then one national newspaper captured the mood with a stark front page carrying Catherine's photograph beneath 3 words: a mother's line. The framing was powerful, because it reduced the entire crisis to one simple question: how far should adult disagreements be allowed to reach into a child's life? Windsor became another focus of attention. A small crowd gathered outside the royal residence, a historic home used by the monarchy for both public duties and private family occasions. One woman speaking to a broadcaster said children should never carry arguments that belong to grown-ups. Her words spread quickly because they echoed the very boundary Catherine had tried to enforce. Meghan saw the reaction and resisted the urge to answer publicly. Harry had already told her what he understood after speaking privately with William, and his words stayed with her. Instead of defending herself through statements or interviews, she wrote Catherine a direct private message. She acknowledged that whatever larger point she intended to make, Charlotte should not have been the person used to make it. Catherine read the message carefully. She did not forget the earlier Windsor conversation, and she did not pretend years of tension had vanished. But Meghan had finally addressed the exact wound instead of arguing around it. That mattered. Catherine agreed to one final private conversation. William would not attend. Harry would not attend. Charles would not stand between them. The public had already chosen its symbols, but the true ending would come somewhere much quieter, between the 2 women who had started on opposite sides of the room. When Catherine and Meghan finally met again, there was nothing left to perform for anyone else. No husband stood beside them. No monarch waited to make a ruling. No audience needed convincing. The argument had already caused enough damage. What remained was simpler and harder. One woman needed to explain why she had walked away, and the other needed to decide whether defending her original intention mattered more than acknowledging the boundary she had crossed. Catherine spoke first, and there was no anger in her voice. She told Meghan that leaving the gathering had never been meant as punishment or humiliation. She walked out because once Charlotte became the subject, staying would have made the conversation feel acceptable. For the Princess of Wales, the issue was painfully simple. Adults could argue about duty, tradition, pressure, and the monarchy itself, but they could not turn her daughter into evidence for those arguments. Meghan listened without interrupting. She explained that her concern had always been about institutions shaping children before those children fully understood the roles being placed upon them. Yet she also admitted something she had resisted before. By choosing Charlotte personally as her example, she had made Catherine's daughter carry the weight of an argument that belonged entirely to adults. Meghan then gave Catherine what had been missing from every earlier exchange. She apologized directly. No defense followed. No qualification softened it. She said she should not have spoken about Charlotte that way, and she promised she would not repeat the mistake. Catherine accepted the apology, but she did not pretend years of tension had vanished. She simply made the boundary permanent. Disagreements between adults could continue, but their children would remain outside them. Catherine later told William privately that she considered the matter finished. The prince understood that she was not asking him to fight another battle. Meghan gave Harry the same message, and he recognized that defending his wife no longer required reopening the wound. For once, both brothers were allowed to step away from a conflict instead of inheriting another one. Charles chose restraint as well. The king decided no royal decree was needed, a decree being a formal order issued under royal authority. because the most important outcome was personal, not institutional. The family had learned that disagreement did not create unlimited permission to discuss someone else's child. Catherine had not defeated Meghan, and Meghan had not surrendered every criticism she held about royal life. Something more important had happened. A mother had refused to let her daughter become collateral damage, and another woman had finally acknowledged where the line should have been. Catherine entered that gathering prepared to tolerate disagreement. She left when disagreement became personal, and when the dust settled, her message was impossible to misunderstand. Whatever battles the adults of the monarchy still choose to fight, Princess Charlotte will not be used as the battlefield. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.